just to briefly introduce Pete, Pete used to come to Oxford. He was a PPist and got 3 blues in rugby. He worked for Christians in sport for a while, supporting professional athletes in their faith. And he's now currently a senior minister at a new church in London. Yeah, Pete, if I invite you onto the stage. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you very much for joining us here today. And please keep eating your food as you go through. Can I just emphasise, do be texting questions through as we go through. I'm sure that I'll say things that might provoke questions. Maybe I'm not clear on something. And I'll be hanging around at the end as well, so if we don't get to deal with your question, do please come and grab me. If I've got time this afternoon, I'll happily treat you to a coffee, and we can sit down and chat if there's a group of us maybe, if you'd like to do that. Yesterday, Andy, who's doing the evening tours, came up and said that what he's trying to do in the evenings is he's, if you imagine that through the metaphor of the Christian belief system being a house, that what he's trying to do is take us into the house and put our feet up and enjoy the front room. He said he's a little bit like an estate agent. Someone came up to me after the talk yesterday and says, does that make you the chartered surveyor then? Because you're the one looking at the foundations. And I guess that's not a bad way to play with the metaphor. We won't milk it any longer. But I guess what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get into some of the foundations of Christianity and ask some of these very pertinent questions about it. I said yesterday that hopefully the talks hold together, each one on its own, but particularly one builds on the other onto the other. So we looked at relevance yesterday, because I guess if you're not persuaded that this even matters, you wouldn't come along. So first of all, does it really matter? Is it relevant? Today we're looking at the issue of truth. How do we know what is true? Is there any such thing as truth in the sphere of religious belief and values? Tomorrow, of course, as soon as we start talking about truth, we're going to be coming across the issue in our society of tolerance. Is it possible to claim truth without being exclusive or domineering or dismissive of other people with different opinions? And then on Thursday, we're looking at pleasure. What is the good life, the best way to live? Is pleasure that, or is there something else? And how does Christianity connect with this idea of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain? And finally, we'll land on Friday with identity. What difference does believing in Jesus Christ make to me, my understanding of who I am, and my sense and source of identity? So that's where we're going. Truth, though, today. This must be true because I read it in the Reader's Digest. You can ask me afterwards what I was doing reading the Reader's Digest, but I was reading the Reader's Digest, and I read this story that a girl came into a doctor's GP practice, and she said, "Doctor, I need you to look at something. It's my tattoo. It's got infected." And the doctor saw her tattoo, and sure enough, it was infected. It was a kind of a Japanese symbol. And the teenager then said to the doctor, "Look, please, please, please keep it confidential. I'm really nervous. My parents don't know I've got a tattoo. They'd flip out. They'd go mental if they knew I had a tattoo." And the doctor said, "Fine, of course, our relationship is protected by, patient-doctor confidentiality. Out of interest, it's a pretty symbol. What does it mean?" And the patient, the girl, without any means of hesitation at all, without flinching, said, "Oh, that's simple. It means truth and honesty." She didn't even think about it. Now, I want to suggest that to you, that in that mildly titillating kind of anecdote, that is where we're at today with our view of truth. We love the idea of truth and honesty and integrity. It's very attractive to our generation, but we are nervous about it. We're skeptical about it. And look, if you just take a survey of the kind of news and views as you look around, you'll see that we're a culture that on one level is always wanting truth. We've had it lots recently with endless inquiries, whether it's the Leveson inquiry or the Pledgate inquiry, the Mark Duggan inquiry. I mean, it just seems that every week an issue is coming up, and we're trying to, through these inquiries, get to the bottom of what is the truth in this matter. Can we navigate our ways through all of the spin and the bluster to find out the truth underneath it all? And that's why those inquiries matter. But at the same token, we're very nervous about truth as a generation, aren't we? Because we know too well that those who claim to have truth so often use it as a tool in the abstract to manipulate people. Whether it's going back historically to the gulags of Stalin's Russia or the oppression of numerous totalitarian or communist regimes, whether it's to today and to the institutionalized organizations such as churches sometimes, who hide behind a veneer of truth rather than letting justice be done for the individuals who've been abused, whether it's the politicians who claim to have truth but are really just spinning it so that they get our votes. We're nervous because we've seen that people use truth with a capital T, with very fast and loose, with the real nature of facts and values. and they use it to manipulate us. We're a generation that kind of, whether we've encountered Michel Foucault's philosophy or not, we know that truth claims can often be power plays. And so we're nervy about it. We love truth on one level, we want it, but we're nervous about it. So what do we do with that? Well, I think what we do is we tend to divide truth. I think we divide truth into two areas. We divide truth into the realm of facts on one hand and values on the other hand. So facts, things like science and mathematics and inquiries, where we look for the facts. And no one is being philosophers and man and saying we're not so sure whether we can find truth. But then on the other side of things, we have values and meanings, and we say there, no one really knows what is true. And so we're relativists or we're pluralists, and we're not sure. It's what's true for you. And so we kind of retreat in those areas from making truth claims into just saying it's my opinion, fine to have your opinion, but just don't claim it's true. The problem is that might sound initially quite attractive. You think that kind of gets you off the horns of the dilemma of this division between, how do we want truth but not manipulate people with our truth claims. The problem is, I don't think we can really divide truth up like that. I mean, imagine that you'd started going out with someone, and then a friend came up to you and said, mate, I really need to speak to you because the person you're going out with, I just found out something about how they've been acting over the last year, and it really is very revealing about their values and what they really think about you. You wouldn't say, Pete, I don't think we can know truth in the realm of value and meaning. Don't worry about it. Just leave it alone, would you? Now, it's hardly silly, but the point is, when something that really matters to you is on the line, you're not a relativist, are you? I used to work in the city. I never heard any, lawyer or businessman who was doing due diligence on a corporate takeover turn around and say, what is truth? It's just relative for you, relative for me. We don't know what truth is. No one says that. Now, it almost sounds ludicrous, but that's the point. In philosophy, we'll say that about values and meanings, but we don't say it in the real world. And I studied PPE here and stayed on, did a postgraduate degree, and the thing I became convinced of is that if our philosophies are to have any real value in life, they must cut it in the real world. They've got to make a difference when your foot hits the pavement, when you walk out the door. Otherwise, it's nice, we're in our ivory towers and we philosophize here and we learn to blag really well at Oxford. By the way, you are becoming a good blagger whilst you're here at Oxford, aren't you? Be honest now. You go back home, people are intimidated by the fact you're at Oxford, so you can say things confidently, and people don't even know you don't know what you're talking about. You know that's true. But in the realm of values and meanings, we need truth, because the world is oriented around truth. Walter Lippmann, a political commentator, wrote this: there can be no liberty for a community which lacks the means to detect lies. And it's not just true for a community. There's no liberty in your own life if you lack the ability to detect lies. So I put it to you that we're not so philosophical when it comes to a division of truth when it comes to our lives. The world doesn't divide so neatly along those lines. But it works the other way, that actually we can't take value and meaning out of facts either. It's a myth, I put it to you, that science and mathematics are kind of devoid of value and meaning. Take someone who is much brighter than I and take their word for it. A guy called Bertrand Russell, if you do philosophy, you'll definitely know who he is. He wrote this: mathematics, rightly viewed, possesses not only truth, but supreme beauty. A beauty cold and austere, yes, like that of a sculpture, yet sublimely pure and capable of a stern perfection, such as only the greatest art can show. The true spirit of delight, the exaltation, the sense of being more than man, which is the touchstone of the highest excellence, is to be found in mathematics as much as in poetry. Mathematicians or scientists, someone talk of an elegant solution to a problem. What makes one solution more elegant than the other? You can't pin it down just to pure facts. There's a value judgment, there's an aesthetic there. These things can't be divided, they're integrated. So I don't think that we can divide the world so neatly along those lines. I also think that it misunderstands that the absence of truth leads to enslavement, whilst the truth is that which sets us free. So Jesus Christ famously said, then you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. Now it's interesting that he links truth and freedom. He links truth and freedom. And if we're skeptical about truth, I put it to you that we love the idea of freedom. We want to be free, rightly so. But can we be free if we're not sure of what the truth is? Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a Nobel Prize winner for literature. And he got put in prison in the Stalinist Russia for 11 years in a work concentration camp of sorts, in a labor camp, because he recorded and wrote down the truth of what he was seeing about the Stalinist regime. He was passionate about the truth. That search for truth led him eventually to become a Christian. But he wrote about it and pursued the truth. And he wrote this: "One word of truth outweighs the entire world." You see, I wonder if sometimes in our kind of Western world we're so fast and loose with the truth because we don't value it, because we've not had it taken away from us. But the experience commonly of those who have seen regimes manipulating as the truth is not that they retreat to a relativism, it's that they fight tooth and nail for the truth, because they say without truth there is no freedom. Do you want to be free? Well, what is the truth about who you are, where you come from? What is the truth about what you should believe? It's very difficult to be free if you don't know those things. You're putting yourself open to being manipulated by those who would claim truth. And let's be honest, there's lots of people in the world who will do that. So please don't dismiss truth. Have your antenna up, yeah, but let's think about it. Let's reason and try and work out what truth is. And to take it down from the abstract and a kind of philosophical level to the personal level, because I'm a vicar at a church in London, or a pastor, I prefer that to vicar. My wife laughs when I think of myself as a vicar, and I laugh as well. It's weird, really. I struggle to find a vicar collar that really fits my neck, but you know, if you find one, then let me know. Anyway, when I work at this church in London, I have some people that I've kind of counselling pastorally who face addictions. I can think of one guy, he's addicted to alcoholism and substance abuse, another guy's addicted to pornography. The key turning point with both of these men has come when truth has come into their lives. The great difficulty early on for me and for them, I think, was working out what was them protecting their addiction with lies and half-truths, and where the truth really came. And eventually, as someone said, the hardest thing to give is in. They gave in to the truth. They stopped lying. They confronted their addiction. And that for them and for me was like a dawn breaking in on a dark night of storms and obscurity. Because finally we could see the truth. They were honest. Honest about themselves, honest about their problems. That was the means to change. Truth sets us free. So let's think a little bit then about the nature of truth. And fundamentally, the basis of Christian truth is not abstract. It's not abstract. The basis of Christian truth is found in a person. That is, we're not here this week trying to put across a philosophy or a dogma or a doctrine. That's not saying that there's nothing philosophical about the Christian faith or about the person of Jesus Christ. But it's saying that fundamentally the Christian claim is that truth is found in a person. And that person is Jesus. The Apostle Paul famously says, we proclaim him. Not a philosophy, not a dogma, not a doctrine, not a set of religious assumptions, but a person. Who might give rise to a philosophy and a theology, but a person nonetheless. And the great thing about proclaiming a person is that you see, a person can't be divided up so easily into facts and values. A person has an integrity. We get that word, as you'll know, from the word for integer, meaning a wholeness, a whole number. And so a person has a personal integrity where facts and values come together. And the thing with Jesus Christ is very interesting. As you look at his ethical teaching, I want you to compare his ethical teaching to how he acts, and that is what sets him apart. See, many people have had high ideals, but no one else has lived a life like him. He says, pray for those who persecute you, forgive your enemies. But then the astonishing thing is, when he's on the cross, wrongly, because he did nothing wrong, he does pray for his enemies. He says, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. There's an integrity there which is beckoning, I put it to you. Albert Einstein called him the luminous Nazarene for the way that his life and his teaching lit up the pages of history. There's an integrity. The second thing, though, is in the person of Jesus Christ. Well, a person is not abstract, and so is not so easily open to manipulation. This came home to me a few years ago when I've always wondered, I'm a big fan of American football, gridiron as they call it in the States, and I've always wondered, are American football players really that much bigger than rugby players? It just troubled me many times when I was sitting in my PP tutorials. My mind would drift off to these things and I'd wonder. And I had the privilege a few years ago when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were playing at Wembley in that game that they play outside of the US. I got invited in from Christians in Sport to go and speak to the players at their chapel on a Saturday evening. Because they play on a Sunday, the Christian players have a chapel on a Saturday evening. So So I was quite nervous about this, but I thought finally I'll get to see how much bigger American football players are than rugby players, which is obviously a very important thing to settle. So I went in and gave this talk, and at the end of it, a guy who's defensive tight end came up to me. Now, this guy was unbelievably enormous, like 6'7" or 9" or something like that, and as wide as he was tall. And I thought, here's my moment, I get to settle the debate once and for all. So I looked at him and I said, look, I hope you don't take offence. That's sensible when you got someone that big to say that. And I said, do you mind me asking you, how much do you weigh? A personal question, he's a big lad, he can take it. So he said to me, how much do you think I'll weigh? So, and I said to him, I looked at him and I thought, I've got to convert from kilograms to pounds, up to, okay, 250 pounds, you know, something like that, offering it out there, which is about 120 kilograms. And he looked at me with a smile on his face and he said, nah man, I'm free-fitted. 350 pounds, 170 kilograms, and that settled it once and for all. They are officially bigger than rugby players. There you go, if you take nothing else away from this lunchtime, there you have it. American football players are bigger than rugby players. Now what's my point? My point is that people have an integrity about them, they have a substantiality about them. Is that a word? It doesn't matter. They have something about them, there's a substance. You can't manipulate a person. If you say, Pete, I like to think of your wife as this, I'd say, well, have you met her? She's like this. People often say, I like to think of God like this, but he's a person. Have you met him? Have you been introduced to him? He has his own integrity. He's substantial. He's got a substance. You can't just say, I like to think of him like this. The question is he like that? And persons have an integrity, persons have a substance to them, which means you can't so easily divide up the truth. And the big turning point for me when I wasn't a Christian studying here at university was when one of my friends pushed me. And I remember it quite clearly. I'd actually come to a week of talks like this and I was quite engaged with some things that were being said. We were having a great debate in the pub afterwards and she said, Pete, it's great that we're discussing this and it's good to discuss philosophy and the theology and, you know, Christian kind of theism and things like that. But why don't you look at the person of Jesus Christ on the pages of Scripture? Because it's one thing to debate him, it's another thing to meet him. That was a big moment for me. And I'm not trying to claim here that there will be some kind of just a sense of it's true straight away when you do that. What I'm trying to claim is that Christian truth is based on a person, and if you don't engage with that person, you're going to struggle to know whether it's true or false. And if it's true, and now we move from the division of truth to the nature of truth to the hallmarks of truth, I put it to you that truth has 3 key hallmarks. And maybe you want to take these as a test and apply them to the person of Jesus Christ and see, does he stack up to these hallmarks of truth? Here they are. First of all, internal consistency. Secondly, external verifiability. And thirdly, existential authenticity. Let me slow them down and take them one by one. Internal consistency. What I mean by that, or what philosophers mean by that, is does it make sense within itself as a system, a philosophical system? Does Jesus Christ contradict himself on key points? You know this, if you're in a jury and you have a witness giving a testimony, if the witness says one thing and then later on under questioning contradicts that with another thing and the story doesn't stack up, there is an internal inconsistency to their testimony. And it is most likely, therefore, that they are not telling the whole truth, or that there are lies in their testimony, and they can be discredited as a witness. Here's the question. When you look at the life and teaching of Jesus Christ, is there a consistency there? Do his words stack up? And not only the life of Jesus Christ, remember the Christian claim is that the Scriptures, the whole of the Old and New Testament, testify about him. Is there a consistency to the Scriptures? Do they stack up or do they contradict one another? That was a big thing for me. I really kicked the tires on it, to use a buying a car metaphor. I looked at it and I wanted to find out, does this Bible stack up? Is it consistent or does it contradict itself? And I put it to you, there's a staggeringly consistent message of 66 books over 1,500 years and 39 different authors, all telling one story, climaxing in one person. Over 900 prophecies about that one person, fulfilled in great detail. What do you make of that? There's an internal consistency there, one of the first hallmarks of truth. Secondly, external verifiability. What I mean by that external verifiability is that if something is true over here and something else is true over here and they connect, they will stack up with one another. You know, if Johnny has a testimony about what this talk was like and Jane has another testimony about what this talk is like, and they're both true, they will stack up. Well, so it is with the Christian claim, because Jesus made his mark in space, time and history. He's not an abstract philosophy, he's a person who really lived and really died. And therefore it stacks up. There's a fascinating bit in Acts chapter 26 when the Apostle Paul is on trial for his life, and he eventually gets pulled before a king called Festus. And he turns to Festus when he's testifying for his life, and he talks to Festus about the reality of the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And it is astonishing what he says to Festus. He says, "The king knows about these things, and to him I speak boldly, for I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice, for this has not been done in a corner." What he means is, he's saying, look, this isn't just some obscure thing that someone's made up. This leaves its muddy paw prints all over history. It's there. And if Jesus Christ rose from the dead physically, appeared, as the Apostle Paul claims in 1 Corinthians 15, up to 500 brothers at one time, that means brothers and sisters, people who trust in Christ, at one time, you would expect it to be making a massive mark on history. And I put it to you, you can investigate that. Look at the history of the early church. Engage with it. Think about it. Look at the New Testament documents. Do they stack up? Are they reliable? Do they stack up with archaeology and other things that are true? Test them. We said yesterday, didn't we, that come with your questions, have a skepticism, please don't be gullible. Don't leave your brain at the door, but be open about it. Are you open to testing it? Are you open to looking into it? Internal consistency, external verifiability, and finally, existential authenticity. I've got to be honest now, I just wanted to use that phrase here in Oxford. I can't get away with it anywhere else. In London, people roll their eyes and go, oh, for goodness sake, you're such a ponce. But here I can get away with it because, you know, I take it that we're kind of all a little bit poncy about philosophy together. I'm sorry if you want to put yourself in that bracket, I've just put it with me. There we go. Existential authenticity. What I mean by that is, does it stack up with your life? Does it make sense of you? Does it make sense of the world you live in? Jesus Christ makes great claims about human nature. Do his claims stack up? He talks about us being made in the image of God with great value and dignity, but also having something in our lives called sin. That means moral failure before a perfect God, a holy God. And I think that just makes sense of us, because we're cut so fine down the middle. We've got high ideals, and yet we fail those ideals so readily, so quickly. It was always astonishing to me that Jean-Jacques Rousseau waxed lyrical about liberté, fraternité, and égalité, and then he put 11 of his children into an orphanage where most of them died before the age of 10. Where was the liberty for them? How is it that such beautiful teaching can find such hypocrisy in the life of a human being? We have high ideals and a deep fallenness to our nature. Maybe you're starting to see that in your own life. How do you make sense of that? Love being the greatest value in the world, according to Christianity, does that make sense of the world? Hope being that which gets you through the dark days, because there's a reality of hope in the future. Is that the way you can be sustained through suffering? These are the big questions to life. And I put it to you that as you test them and kick the tires on them, so Christianity comes through with an authenticity that stacks up with your life experience. Internal consistency, external verifiability, and thirdly, existential authenticity. But let me then come into a close on the final part of truth, which is that there's a challenge to truth. The challenge to truth. Because I think we can be a bit naive about truth. I think we can just believe that if I'm presented with the truth, I will automatically believe it, as though I'm somehow a neutral observer in all of this piece. But I guess the truth is, or the reality is that often for us, the problem is not so much information, but lack of inclination. Not so much information, but lack of inclination. You see, why is it that often when you have little children and they're running around, they've done something naughty, that when they're presented with the truth, they kind of run away? But it's not lack of information. They don't want the truth to find them out. But let's be honest for a minute, it's not just children, is it? We often play a hide-and-seek game with truth. I wonder if you've ever been in that situation where you did something really bad, and you didn't want to be found out, and so you told a lie. What do you then have to do? You have to sustain the lie. So you tell another lie to back up the other lie. And after you say the lie over and over and over again, you've got a web of lies, and you start to struggle to navigate even where the truth wasn't all of that piece. You didn't mean to do that, but you've kind of sown this web of lies to protect yourself and protect your own ego from being found out. We all do it. I even do it sometimes as a Christian. Fortunately, my wife is a really good detective and she finds me out. But we all do it. You see, our problem is not always information, it's lack of inclination. And it's very interesting that at the end of Jesus' life, when he's under trial, and it's a kangaroo court and it's an unjust trial, he's before the prefect Pontius Pilate, it comes down to a debate about truth. And Jesus says these words, "Everyone who is of the truth listens to me, for I am truth." And Pilate turns around and says something astonishing. He says, "What is truth?" Now, why is Pontius Pilate indulging in philosophy at a key moment in Jesus' life, when Jesus is on trial for his life? Well, it's because he knows that this man is innocent, but he's terrified that if he doesn't give him over to death, he's going to have a crowd uprising. So he relativizes truth to make some elbow room for himself, to get himself off the hook, to appease his guilty conscience. That's what's going on. And Jesus confronts him about it. He says, look, if you're on the side of truth, you will accept that what I'm saying is true. And Pontius Pilate philosophizes what is truth and washes his hands, and the rest is history. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who spent his life campaigning for truth, was martyred as a Christian for truth, standing up to the evils of Nazi regime, wrote this: "The cross is God's truth about us, and the only power which can make us truthful." The cross is God's truth about us, and the only power which can make us truthful. The cross of Jesus Christ exposes what we do with the truth, that too often we prefer lies to truth, we prefer darkness to light. We hide away from it, fear of our exposure, of being found out. We run away and hide. And yet what is staggering is at the cross, what does God do with the truth about us? Remarkable. He doesn't use it to domineer us or to exploit us or to expose us. He takes the truth about human nature, and at the cross, one person is described as this: he throws it away into the sea of his forgetfulness. God doesn't sweep the truth under the carpet, but he finds a way through forgiveness to forgive us for our lies that we tell, and to lead us into a non-threatening truth, a revelation about who we are and who he is. That is why the cross is the climax of the truth of the Christian story. As I close, my favourite poet is a guy called Francis Thompson. He was a 19th century poet, and he had an extraordinary life. He ran away from his parental expectations because he was a child prodigy and a genius, and a brilliant writer and a poet. And he ran away from his parents and became a vagrant and addicted to various substances and to alcohol. Occasionally he would write a poem. He would send it into his local paper in London, and the paper would publish it saying that one greater than Milton is amongst us and we know not who. Eventually he realised that he'd been running away all his life, not primarily from his parental expectations, but from God. He wrote that very famous poem, Hound of Heaven. And one night, on his own, he came to realise the truth about Christianity, and he gave his life to Christ. He penned a very famous poem, and a very beautiful poem, called The Kingdom of Heaven. And it talks about his battle with truth, and eventually the way he gave in to the plain truth he knew all his life. I'm just going to end with it. He wrote this: "A world invisible we view thee, a world intangible we touch thee. A world unknowable we know thee, inapprehensible we clutch thee. Does the fish soar to find the ocean, the eagle plunge to find the air? Do we ask of the stars in motion if they have rumour of thee there? Not where the wheeling systems darken and our benumbed conceiving soars. The drift of pinions hearken beats of our own clay shuttered doors. The angels keep their ancient places, turn but a stone, and start to wing. 'Tis ye, 'tis your estranged faces that miss the many splendid thing. But when so sad thou canst not sadder cry, and upon thy so sore loss shall shine the traffic of Jacob's ladder pitched betwixt heaven and Charing Cross. Yea, in the night, my soul, my daughter, cried, clinging heaven by the hems, and lo, Christ walking on the water. not of Gennesarite, but tens. Thanks for listening.
Okay guys, thanks very much. Yeah, as I said before, we're just going to come together now for about 10 minutes to have a quick question and answer session. Obviously, Pete's kindly agreed to stay on for this. Let me just introduce the other two people. Firstly, we have Sharon. Sharon's a student leader at St. Eb's Church, which is in the centre of Oxford. And we also have Dave, who is a pastor at Manual Church that meets at Magdalen College School. Okay, without much further ado, we have the first question. What's the evidence that the man Jesus of Nazareth existed?
Well, that's a good question because it's talking about evidence, and in our title today of truth, we need to come with open skepticism that was talked about yesterday, but we need to come open to look at the evidence. I think I was just reading through the Gospel of John before I came, and one of the verses there says, Jesus is speaking, and he says about the scriptures, that they bear witness to him. And that's not the only place where that is referenced. So Jesus claimed that the scriptures bear witness to him. And so the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are all biographical, historical accounts of this man Jesus. So then it becomes, well, what is the evidence? How historically strong is their witness, is there evidence to this man Jesus? And so just like we do with any piece of history, we apply tests to that. We look at the manuscripts, and you can look into this textual variation, and different manuscripts from different points are strong in different ways. So there's a whole science to that, and I've looked into that, and that is worth considering. Then of course you're looking at the authors' lives who wrote that, and you're looking at how authentic they were and what others have said about them. And in fact, there are non-Christian historians, for example, Josephus, who's a Jewish historian, Tacitus, who was a Roman historian, who are both saying that there was a historical figure called Jesus. He did make the claims that the Gospels say he made, and that there were eyewitnesses who claimed to have seen him. Now, of course, they didn't use that evidence to believe in him, but you can test the historical evidence. And then I would say as well, look at the historical accounts of how the lives who claimed to have met this man changed and were impacted. You know, his followers who ran away scared from the cross then claimed to have seen him, and their lives were radically changed. They became courageous martyrs. And then again, personal testimony of people who claim to have met this man, Jesus, who claim that he's alive now. I'm one of those people. So personal testimony of people who say they know him, that he's changing their lives. A few thoughts.
Brilliant. Can we have the next question, please? When there are bits of the Bible that seem contradictory and inconsistent, Christians always have some complex theological way of explaining the inconsistency away. Why is the consistency so well hidden?
I mean, I often respond to that by saying something, and obviously we're not going to be able to do it now, but by saying, let's take me to the one you've got a problem with, and let's talk about that, and then let's see whether it's so complex. So please come and grab me afterwards, and we can talk about that. I mean, in general terms, it's worth saying that if we had a number of testimonies from witnesses on the stand, that if there was just a perfect match of accuracy between them, you would immediately be suspicious. You'd say, well, it's clearly a stitch-up job. They've just got behind in a room and said, let's say exactly the same thing. So there will need to be enough variation that doesn't actually alter the facts, but the reporting of it needs to be different. So, for example, you might want to say one person say it happened in a week, another person might say it happened on the second day. Those are mutually exclusive. They're just different ways of coming at it. And a lot of the apparent inconsistencies that people talk to are resolved that way. I don't think it's particularly complex theologically, by the way. I just think that those are often just the facts of the way history and witness testimony work. When it comes to kind of some doctrinal things on them, again, I mean, there is a unity about the Christian truth, and therefore it does stack up, but you need to engage with that truth and know what that truth is. And again, I put it to you that no major doctrine of the Bible is at all up for grabs based on any apparent inconsistencies. I say that quite carefully. No major doctrine of the Bible is at all up for grabs based on any apparent inconsistencies. And I've read a lot on this. It was a big question for me. I only ever came down to real minor details around the peripheries. But do come and grab me afterwards and show me if you think I'm wrong with that. I'd be very happy, but it's going to be difficult in this context.
I'll just add on that it's amazing really how much it lines up when you consider the time period over which the Bible's been written over. and how few contradictions or even apparent contradictions that there are. And bearing in mind the styles of the writing, so much of the writing, some of it's poetic, some of it's letters, there's all kinds of different styles, so some things need to really depend on what style of writing you're reading, and that does take a bit of work in terms of looking into it and reading into it to really get that, and it does take time for me personally. I grew up in a Christian family, but it did take me a while to really figure this out for myself, and as I had friends who had questions, and now I'm a church pastor working through these things, it takes time really getting to grips with who was writing it, what kind of style were they writing it in, because some contradictions are, well, that's a poetic image, so it's not going to literally line up with something that's said elsewhere necessarily in that kind of sense, but that's just an example of an apparent contradiction, but it's a big question, so it's hard to know exactly where you're going at there, so you might want to ask more afterwards.
Brilliant. Next question. What if I earnestly search for the truth, but never find that Jesus is the truth? Is there hope for me?
I think I'd maybe just come back on that final point that I landed on. I think I'd want to question your neutrality. Because I think one of the things is the assumption is that your position you're in now is not a vested position. No one's neutral. You've got a deeply embedded position. You've got great investment in it. To put it this way, a pastor was asked, an American pastor was asked, you know, like, why does he have faith in Jesus? And he put it this way, he said, well, I don't have enough faith not to have faith in Jesus. He said, I can't believe this world is random. I can't believe that when I use terms like love and hope that I'm just dancing to the synapses of my brain, but there's no real substance to them. I can't believe that the incredible unity of the Bible has all just come about by chance. You know, all these different authors over time, and he went on and on and on. He's saying he didn't have enough faith to believe those things. So doubt your doubts, or doubt your own position. If you're going to scrutinise Christianity, if you're going to have a real authenticity and integrity about it, you need to actually evaluate your own foundations as much and with as much scrutiny, and ask yourself how well do they stand up to scrutiny. So I don't think you're not neutral coming to it saying I need to be persuaded of Christianity. You're in an embedded position already, everybody is, there's no neutrality, and are you sure of your own position, and you need to evaluate Christianity and your own position at the same time and put it to you. That's the only authentic position to hold. And often people assume that agnosticism or atheism is somehow neutral and Christianity is somehow biased. I think that's just very philosophically naive. So I push back on that a bit.
Forgive me for going on about John, but I'll be getting really into the Gospel of John. Here's something I read just before I came in. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness. Or a chapter earlier, he said, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. And I love the earnestness behind this question. If you seek me, Jesus says, you will find me. So keep seeking and keep looking at what he says. And the claim is you will not walk in darkness.
I think we've got time for one more question. Why is the truth of other religions less true than that of Jesus?
Well, I think, first of all, it's, I think one of them has to be true, and the others can't, so I don't think there's many religions that would claim that theirs is true as well as all the others. There are some who might have elements of that in it, and there might be some people who, within those religions, who claim things like that, but I think overall, the overriding teaching of those religions, everyone would claim that they were true. I think to highlight some of the unique claims of Jesus would be, for me, it'd be the only religion where the claims are about a person and relationship with that person, rather than in some way earning yourself into a relationship with God or earning yourself a good position in life or a good standing in life. So I would say that was the unique claim. I'm trying to gauge whether there's a question behind that question of really whether it's are we being intolerant by thinking that? And sorry if that's not the question you're asking, but just to touch on that, I think that by believing in Jesus, it actually allows me to look up and see the good in people who walk in other ways of life more than not, because my belief isn't that I work myself into a good position, but I'm relying totally on Jesus Christ. So because I'm in that position, rather than saying I've worked so hard to get myself into this good position, I can see the good in others as well. So maybe that's the question behind that, but I'm not sure.
And a bit of a plug for tomorrow. I'm looking at tolerance tomorrow, where we'll be dealing with some of this issue. It's not entirely a question on just other religions, but I think it is one of the big questions, but Dave did touch on it then. One of the things we'll look at is actually the nature of Christian truth. I think is the type of truth that will help you to see what is good in other worldviews and good in them, but without, if you like, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, where you therefore throw your hands up and say, well, there's no truth, it's all relative. Because as I've tried to show today, I think that position can't work. So come along tomorrow and find out a bit more on how do we engage with it without being intolerant, and what is Christianity, and this tension of truth and tolerance, how is that resolved within the person of Jesus Christ?
Brilliant.